Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness. When this episode airs, will be exactly 1 week since the meeting of all Mountain Toughers in Bozeman, Montana for Tough Fest. I'm currently sitting in a chair with my legs hurting terribly after the workout that we all got to do together, but it was a lot of fun. Nonetheless, if you are looking to get in shape for your trap line, for outdoor activities, for your kids, for whomever, go check out Mountain Tough Fitness. They have a lot of different options for everybody, from people with equipment, without equipment, to do on your own. It's a great application, a lot of cool fun. And you can use the promo code Okayest30, all caps, Okayest30, and get a 30-day free trial. But today's guest is someone that I have been very excited to chat with. She's a fellow adult onset trapper who quickly grew from hobby trapping to damage control work. She, her husband, and 2 daughters work their farm where they raise some cattle, horses, chickens, bees, goats, alpacas. The list goes on and on. And she is also the founder and owner of Wolf and Fox, a company that produces luxury, real fur-based products. She also happens to be the first Canadian that I've had on the show. So Stacey Skyrpan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It was very nice for you to get a hold of me and ask me to be here. I'm excited but nervous.
Well, no need to be nervous. We don't bite too terribly. We don't bite as bad as some traps might if you have a misfire. But where I always like to start with folks is, what is your earliest memory of being exposed to trapping?
I've honestly always been exposed to trapping. We had a family friend while I was growing up in the early 80s. And whenever my mom was tired of all of us kids, my dad would take myself and my next brother, and we'd go out to the trap line, and we were go for the weekend or whatever. And we would stay in this little log cabin in the middle of nowhere. His name was Trapper Don, and he was such a gem of a man, just a giant. He was, I think, 6'5". I'm 5'1", so he always made me feel really tiny, and it was great. And he would take us out on the line, and we weren't ever allowed to touch anything, but he was always more accommodating to let us see. I got to see my first lynx. I couldn't even tell you how old I was. I might have been 5 or 6. Wolves, everything, beavers. He always had them laying around the trap line and in the cabin. And he was a man who lived trapping. That was what he did. So I was exposed to it very early. And it was just always a part of my life.
That's amazing. Well, somebody's a real trapper when their name from kids, family members, friends is Trapper Don or Trapper whatever. I hope one day, that it's like Trapper Stacey, Trapper Zach. I hope that's the moniker you and I both get. But as a kid, I take my daughter out on my trap line. She sees beaver, otter, interacts with them, pets them. Like, do you remember, you talked about the lynx, but do you remember any specific critter or animal or experience out there with Trapper Don that, made you think, wow, this is a unique thing that we're doing? Or was it just so part of your childhood that it was, it was just a Tuesday or a Saturday?
It's exactly it. It was always just something that was always a part of my life. So it never was a aha moment until actually after Dawn passed, when I was the year I turned 30, and I met another gentleman. His name, again, funnily enough, was Trapper Bob. And he was like a repeat of Dawn. And I had always thought I had lost that part of my life when Dawn passed. And then I meet Bob, another giant of a man, big twinkly eyes, loved to tell a story, but lived the lifestyle of a trapper. And he was the one who said, if you miss it so much, why don't you take your trapping course? He says, you have a farm, you've got predation control that you can do. Why wouldn't you? And I'm like, you're right. Like, why wouldn't I? And so I ended up taking my course that weekend. There was one in town, just a God thing. It was, everything just lined up so perfectly for me that way. And so I took my course, I passed it, and then I called Bob that night, and I'm like, guess what? Yours and Dawn's legacy get to live on, because I want to learn from you guys and just keep that tradition going. It's such an inherent part of our Canadian history, never mind my family history and theirs. that it just felt important at the time. So if you want an aha moment, I think that was mine when he was like, why don't you? And I'm like, geez, I don't know. Why don't I?
Yeah, man. So it was Trapper Don that was just kind of always a staple in your life growing up. You were always exposed to trapping,
Yeah.
the 80s and 90s. And then when you were hit 30, Trapper Don passes away. You meet Trapper Bob, and he kind of just gives you this, not really an ultimatum, but kind of maybe that reality slap of like, hey, like this can be a part of your life forever too. It doesn't have to be held with me or Trapper Don, and you just dive all in. And this is when you're 30, right?
Actually, I was 37 that year. It was a few years without Bob, and it was just kind of feeling like my kids are growing up, and I'm not sure what to do next with my life. And it was just, like I said, such a God thing. It was a timing thing. And then, yeah, and then Bob comes into my life, and I think it was in 2015, and by 2017, so I was 37 that year. He was like, why don't you? And I'm like, yep, you're right. Why don't I? And just kind of ran all in with it. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a lot of questions there. But this is going to be a good segue into two questions that I actually have that are Canadian specific. So, as my first Canadian,
okay.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What is the perception of trapping and trappers in Canada? I have my perception, like you said, like the fur trade, like it was French Canadian led.
Yeah.
I would like to think that there's this like warm fuzziness that's taught in schools, but I'm sure it might be similar to the US right now where it's almost kind of pushed aside and almost being forgotten. But I'd love to know, what is the perception of trappers and trapping in Canada in 2024, which is scary to say.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Hey, so I, I'm not exactly the best person to ask that. Number one, I homeschooled my girls, so they were not in the public system. But I can say that we're very rural where I'm at. I call it north of nowhere. We're in the northern part of Alberta, where it is a very accepted way of life. It goes hand in hand between hunting, farming, ranching. Trapping is just something that happens out here. But I do know when I go to the cities, especially further south in Alberta, when I go to my sales or my markets for wolf and fox, I do get some kickback, but mostly in very curious questions because they're not exposed to it. They know it's part of our Canadian history, but they've never met a trapper, or they don't know why we trap or what we trap and how. And so I've loved being able to take that time where I'm promoting my craft, but I'm also promoting the trapping industry, and I'm able to teach people what, why, and how we trap. And as Albertans, we can be proud, that not only is it our legacy and our heritage, but as Albertans and Canadians, we actually have some of the highest standards in the world with trapping. And I've been able to be a part of some of the studies, and I think it's really fascinating and interesting that if you take the time, somebody who is, like, I hate to pigeonhole somebody, but I talked to a lady at Christmas time, and she was a complete vegan, totally against everything. And she was like, you mustn't like animals. I'm like, well, that's actually quite contrary, because I have a farm and I love my animals. But, when you come out and you see your brand new calf being chomped on by a coyote, I love that calf, and I'm going to protect the rest of my calves. So I'm going to take that coyote out and the rest, manage the population. But now I'm not wasting that hide anymore. I'm taking that hide and I'm making it into something useful and beautiful that will last. And so it's funny because then you see a light bulb moment and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. And it might not be for everyone. And she came away saying that. She was like, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't, but I understand why, and thank you for spending the time, because now I understand, because she appreciates her pets and whatever. So it was a nice moment to be able to speak to her and her children about it.
Yeah. Presumably she didn't drop veganism in that moment, but nonetheless.
She did, actually, right from the very start. She just, hi, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't get fur. and I'm a vegan, so you have to tell me what you're doing. And so then it was like, oh, okay, here we go. So some are very forward, but at least she had an open mind.
Yeah, and I think I think where everybody would want to get to is open-mindedness and the ability to have those kinds of conversations. Maybe you don't convert somebody into becoming a trapper or even necessarily purchasing real fur, but at the end of the day, just to be able to have a human conversation and explain the why in an articulate manner that shows light, put it in their perspective of saving animals that you'd love as well, or you know managing a resource and leveraging it to its fullest potential versus like
Exactly.
petroleum-based fur. So I think that's beautiful. Next Canadian specific question. So one of my friends, Travis Bader, he runs Silver Core Podcast, which is all about like firearms and instruction in Canada. In talking with him, I understand it's quite difficult in some instances to get licensed to carry a firearm in Canada. So when it comes to trapping, I know you mentioned that you got your trapping license kind of in a God way, like it just showed up as far as the ability to take a course. But what does that look like in Canada? Is it difficult to get licensed to be a fur trapper, and what does the process actually look like?
Okay. Yeah, that's actually it's pretty easy. You just need to find an accredited course. So in Alberta, each province is different. So Alberta is run by the Alberta Trappers Association, and they run accredited courses that are taught by people who are, well, I'm like messing this up, but by approved instructors, right? So then you take a 3-day course, you go out and you learn about the legal part, the the actual trapping part, different and it's because it's only 3 days, you kind of touch on a little bit of everything, and the rest is kind of on your own. But you go out by the end of the 3 days, you're setting certain traps and learning just different ways to read the land and different ways to read the animal and behaviors. So that way you got at least a foot on the ground. And then if you pass your test, it's a written exam, then you're kind of good to go. And then with firearms, I do have my restricted and my possession to carry license, but handguns are not. They are completely restricted. So that would be another 18 hoops I'd have to jump through to be able to carry like a sidearm. In some instances, it would be nice because then it's more accessible, but at the same time, I mean, you just be careful, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to in that scenario. I do feel blessed where we're at, where we can carry whatever and wherever we need, which is a big deal for us down here in the U.S. But you know, when you got your license, you'd followed Trapper Don around for a long time. Was there a point before Trapper Don passed that he was maybe subtly or maybe not so subtly actually teaching you things on the line, or were you really just a tag along at that point in time?
Yeah, at that point in time, it was just a place where the families would meet out, and every Thanksgiving we were there. Like that was bigger than Christmas for us, is Thanksgiving moose hunt camp at Don's Trap Line. We were just out there for fun. It wasn't until I met Bob that I started learning, and I took my course, and then I followed him a few times, because before you can be a full-fledged trapper in Canada, you have to be a junior trapper for 3 years and put in time. So that first year I was under Bob, and unfortunately he met his demise a year later. But before then, he was like, you know what, I just feel like you need to meet my good friend Morley Smith. And Morley Smith in Lac La Biche here, where I'm at in northern Alberta, is known as a local legend, and actually quite renowned in in Canada and in some of the states as a wolf trapper. And so they'd been best friends since the 50s. And so he's like, you need to meet my buddy Morley. So I met Morley, and he was the one who took me on after Bob passed away. So he was my second trapper as a senior who took me on, and I got blessed with some really amazing men who just live and breathe the lifestyle of trapping. They are so knowledgeable. They are so respectful to the land and to the craft that I don't know. I can't even imagine learning from anybody better. And it's really defined me as a trapper because here I am. And, you know, because of through them, I got into our local and got together with some other trappers who are there. Our president is highly involved in a lot of the stuff in Alberta with the caribou task force saving the caribou. So then he put together a wolf program. So I got to be part of that. And it's just fascinating that one small step in your life, God can turn it all around. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're on this rabbit trail and you're chasing this white rabbit, but it's like, you're just learning so much and you get involved in it. And it's such a, I don't know, such a privilege to have learned and to just be a part of this. Like it's, I don't know, like I've learned so much, and now to be able to pass it on to my children and now to people who are around me who, you know, might like my product, but now they can say, hey, why and what? And then, you know, you could just run off on a rabbit trail again and just explain to them, you know, like this is it's a long lost art and we're losing it. And if we don't preserve it, we won't have it anymore. And it's important. I think population control is big, predation control is big, you know, disease control is big, but also taking that and making something that will last generations it's priceless, right? Like what else do you, I don't know how else to explain it that way.
It's legacy. It's legacy in the art form. And I think it's legacy and we'll talk about it in a little bit, like the goods you make. These fur-based products are multi-generational, right? They can last a lifetime and multiple lifetimes and be passed down, and hopefully with the art of trapping itself. But man, you mentioned, and you actually already answered one of the questions I had, which was about mentors. And you have just had, you know, the great fortune and blessed to have a series of really great men, like you mentioned. I don't want to gloss over this point though, because I do think this is a big difference for those who don't know, like between getting licensed in Canada and the US. I had no idea there was a junior requirement. So for 3 years after you got your license, you were required to be under, you know, Trapper Bob, and then unfortunately he passed, and you went with your most recent mentor. But what does that look like? Like, are there X number of hours? What does it mean to be a junior? And then what does it mean to graduate to a senior?
It's not like you get this whole, you know, thing like, you know, you graduate from kindergarten or anything, but basically the biologists here in Alberta, you have to, you know, prove by, you know, animal quotas that you're bringing in a certain amount allotment of animals under an accredited trapper. So that way, you know, they see that you're putting in the effort to learn and to try, right? Like, so it's not like you're just set out free into the world without any mentorship or without any guidance, right? So yeah, it's pretty simple. It's nothing to be scared about. And there are so many great people around who are willing to teach that. And especially if you're of the younger generation, like we see a big trend now where the trappers are all in the older generation. There's a few in mind, not many, and very few of the young adults. So it's nice to see when kids get excited. And as our association for Lac La Biche, we do a lot of little educational programs or even events. Like in the winter, we're part of the Lac La Biche Festival of Speed, and we do a display on the ice, and we show people what we do as trappers, and it's really fascinating and exciting to see people come alive and just get to see it firsthand without actually going out on a trap line, because you know they might not have that opportunity, but it gives them that insight so they can, you know, see about it and maybe get interested and think about it, right? So
just thinking of history, yeah, I would imagine Trapper Don and Trapper Bob trapping through the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s Was that their main livelihood? Because that was kind of closer to the peak of the fur boom. Was that all they were doing for their sustenance at that time?
In the winter, yes, and especially their later years, when they were retired. Don still farmed at his home farm in Saskatchewan. So in the summer he was home, and then in the winter he'd come to his trap line here in Alberta, and he would trap all winter. Bob was a master welder by trade, so he worked all over the world, and for him trapping was his release from that. He was so busy, and he had had a life that he needed, I guess, an escape from. And trapping for him was that he'd done it as a child, and then he came back to it as a later adult after he retired. So it was pretty neat to see how he just took it on. And for him, it was a lifestyle. It was the way he lived. It was not so much a sustenance for his life, because he was set up from his earlier businesses, but for him, it was that escape from the real world, right? That became his real world, and he just lived it and loved it.
And then for you, it seems like legacy, and then obviously the business that you have, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm curious, when you do these like seminars for young kids, what do you see as the motivation for new trappers coming in? Like what is it that is drawing them in other than legacy? Because fur prices have been down.
Yeah.
What do you see kids getting excited about when you do talk to them about fur trapping?
I think for kids, especially, it's the excitement, it's the outdoors, it's the adventure, right? Like, what kid doesn't want to go on an adventure? What kid doesn't want to be outside and it's, you could come home and you've got a story and you feel good about what you did and what you're doing. And I think if they see it presented well, they get excited about it, because now it's something they could be a part of, and it's not anything to be intimidated or afraid of. It's something to enjoy, and to share with your family and be excited about. So I think a lot of kids, they catch on to that really quickly. They see these these legends, these walking legends are excited, and all of them, I can't think of one of them that isn't happy to spend the time with a child and teach them, and not even just teach them, because they're just guiding them through it in a way that they're experiencing it right there. And so I can't think of a better way than hands-on learning to get excited over something, because now you're a part of it. It's way easier, right?
I love it. And I hope that's good motivation for kids to get into it. And maybe, and hopefully, right, the fur market will eventually turn around again.
Yeah.
And also make it a little more profitable to be out there doing it as well. Um, a question that I have is, for everybody that I talk with. Well, actually, hold on. Let me back up. I have another question. Sorry, I'm all over the place. When you started with Trapper Bob and you were doing your first year under him, you're 37 years old. You've already got your farm. Do you remember the first critter that you caught?
Martins. Yeah, he was targeting martins that year. Yeah, so that was some of the first things that we definitely trapped. So, and then on the farm, the first thing I caught was a coyote, and that's what I was targeting, was coyotes, because of my calves. So that first coyote, I'll never forget. I was like, I had made sets all over the place, and I thought I was thinking these through, and I'm going, why am I not catching anything? And I'm trying to be careful, and I'm like, should I walk on the trail and make it easy for them, or should I walk around it? Should I do this or that? And finally, when I finally connected on that first coyote, I was like, the whole happy dance, and just so proud of the fact that I finally did it, right? Like, I didn't care if it was a scabby old coyote by the end of the season. It didn't matter. It was that was cool, right? So
that's special. I mean, I think everybody remembers kind of that first meaningful catch, especially when it sounds like you had the same experience that I did, where you're getting outsmarted and outwitted by a very clever animal at every turn. Do you remember what it was that you might have changed in a set that landed you on your first connection with a coyote?
Yeah, we have a big deer population here. So what was happening was I finally figured out that I was running on trails, like on game trails. But because we have so many deer, they were knocking my sets over. So then finally what I did was I made a jump. I just took just a branch and I put it over my set so the coyote had to duck through, but the deer were just kind of hopping over. And then all of a sudden it was like lightning. It finally worked. And I go out there last morning of the season. I'm like, well, I guess I didn't get anything this year. And because I had got my trapper's license in December. So I actually only had 2 months to really trap. So those 2 months I was like trying so hard. And then finally last day of the season, I get there, there's this coyote just in my snare. And I was so happy.
Oh man. And then with that, was the goal always to do crafts, hats, mittens? Like what kind of came first, the chicken or the egg? Clearly it was trapping that came first, but had you always had the intention of doing everything you could with the fur that you did capture? Or was it control the coyotes, skin them, and then all of a sudden now you have this surplus fur and you start to kind of wonder, hey, what could I do with this?
Yeah, it was kind of more like that. So what happened was is my second year trapping, so doing a lot of residential trapping at home. And that year, it was unheard of in this area to get that many fox. I got 18 fox just on the farm that year. Plus, I think it was at around 15 or 16 coyotes. So I had all this fur. I put in all my heart and time and effort into this fur that I caught on my farm. And Morley and I packed everything up and we drove the 3 hours to Edmonton and we were going to bring it to a fur buyer. And the fur buyer was like, I don't know, like this year's not looking so good. And then he starts looking at my fur and he's like, yeah, $4 for that fox and, $10 for this. And, and I'm going, are you kidding? Like I worked hard for that, and I looked at Morley and Morley looked at me and I'm like, I can't do this. Like it just doesn't seem fair, right? So he's like, I'm not selling my fur. It's up to you. But he says, I think we can do better. And I kind of looked at him and I'm like, I agree. I think we can do better. And so on the way home, I was talking to him and we'd both said at one point, wouldn't it be cool to make a pair of mitts out of something that you trapped? Like, it was just a comment in passing. And then that was it. That just opened Pandora's box. And then all of a sudden Morley and I were hitting up YouTube and, Morley had a friend who was sewing mitts and he was like, how do we do this? And then all of a sudden it was like, now we're making mitts for friends and family. And now we have people asking for more. And then now we're named, because so the name Wolf and Fox Designs is because Morley was known as the Wolf Man. And then that year I was known for trapping all those fox. So that's where Wolf and Fox Designs came from. And so it was just honoring his legacy. And then, my new little up and comings as a new trapper. So I just thought it was a cute name that way. And then Morley retired from mitt making a few years ago because he was just he likes to do his thing. But like what a fantastic thing to share, he's such a dear family friend that we were kind of doing stuff together and he's always doing things with my daughters and we were just making these mitts and hats and learning things and it was just a grand time, like and it was all because the fur market crashed even harder. So
Yeah.
That was the beginning of it all.
I was curious, I think every trapper at some point has felt that, especially as the fur market's gone up and down. Is one thing I don't think non-trappers can appreciate is the amount of effort that goes into any catch, whatever critter you're targeting. It is a difficult and painstaking endeavor that can only be driven from passion in my world. But then to try to sell fur, it's great. Like it helped me out this last year when I lost my job, but usually like I don't sell. I tan them or I get them tanned and do something with them, kind of to remember the experience. But when you did decide to keep those furs, Did you tan them yourselves or did you send them off to a tannery first?
So our first try, we had a lot of fur on our own. We asked questions of friends, tanneries, and just people who had done it before. And our first foray, yeah, we were tanning our own, and it got to be, number one, such a time consuming thing because we were starting to do volume. Like we were starting to make quite a bit. And it was like, okay, so we love the trapping and we really love the creative making and everything. And then we were just finding that our quality of tan compared to like a commercial tan just wasn't up at that upper level where I wanted our product to be. So it was like, okay, so what are we picking to do? And then we just decided everything's going to the tannery, and we're going to focus on making, as high level of quality product as possible. So yes, we have tan, but no, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like I said, 2 years ago, I was doing all my own furs, and then eventually I did send some off to a tannery. And to your point, the difference between a professional tan and a homemade tan in some instances, it's unbelievable, especially when you're going for garments, and especially for garments that like yourself would ultimately end up reselling. So I get that 100%.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I want a product that lasts and is functional and beautiful, and yeah, so to me it was a no-brainer to make that choice. And I just don't have the equipment that they do to do it in a timely fashion, right? So
And from a garment perspective, like it sounded like you and Morley were on YouTube looking up stuff. So did you have a background in sewing, garment making, or was this just like a hey, we're gonna make mitts, and then it just snowballed from there?
exactly it. It was a massive snowball. Yeah, sewing was never a thing that I'm like, my grandma sews quilts and my mom would sew little things for us when we were kids, but it was never anything that I learned or was interested in until I had all this fur and I was refusing to let go of it. So yeah, it was just something that I was like, no, I think I can figure this out, and just pull things apart, and it's basically reverse engineering something, right? So you just have to pull it apart and see how it works, and then I would take ideas too, and like, so my trapper's hats, I always make them longer in the back because I want more neck coverage, because I hate when the snow goes down my back when I'm trapping. But I also wanted them to be able to flip up and wear them, so that way you've got that full fur look, but also it's not overly warm when inevitably you will get too warm wearing natural fur, right? Um so I did take stuff and then kind of add my ideas to it, so that way it became my own design, right? So
Do you remember? So like the first few mitts, family, friends, I'm sure. Do you remember the first time that somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I want you to either A, make me something, or B, I want to buy something from you." And then was that the moment that you had the light bulb like, "Hey, I could actually kind of turn this into a business"? What was that experience like?
it was, yeah, it was kind of like that. We had a Christmas market coming up in town, and we had heard about it. So Morley's wife had heard about it, and she was like, I think you guys have something. I think you guys really have something. You guys should go to the market and just see how it works. And so we just kind of made up a few extra pieces and just got our little table and showed up, and here we are, and people liked it and people loved it, and it was really fun because there were people who were like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted a pair of beaver mitts, or have you ever thought of making a hat? And that's when making the trappers hats, that's kind of one of my favorite things to make, is the trappers hats, after I was able to tinker around with the pattern a bit and um really own that. And it's been such a ride. It's kind of a roller coaster, and it's been full speed ahead and hair flying back, and we're doing this and it's fun. And then 2 years ago, Morley decided that he was done with the mitt making, and so I bought him out. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just been a roller coaster. It's pretty cool. I've been afforded some really amazing opportunities to meet some really incredible people, attend some really neat markets. I have some really exciting ones coming up. And they're pretty big events, so it's going to really open up a new demographic for people to see what we do as trappers, but also, hey, wearing real fur is like, it's not only just a luxury anymore, but I think it can be, functional. I sell to a lot of ranchers and farmers who get it. They're outside all day and they want to be warm and they need something functional. And so it's been fun working with some of them and coming up with new designs and ideas too.
And with these shows, do you see that like being a true resurgence of excitement around real fur for that functionality, for the luxury as well? But what do you see as the driver of that under the hood? Like, in the US, beaver prices went up a little bit. They've just tanked again, unfortunately, but a lot of it was around the show Yellowstone, where people wanted a Stetson hat with beaver fur. What do you see as the driver that is making fur have a little bit of a comeback right now?
I think I see a lot of people who are running back, just with our general economy and our government, feel. A lot of people are running back towards that homesteading, that self-sufficiency, that reliability on yourself and the land, learning how to live off the land. Like there's my youngest daughter is into foraging, and I'm seeing a resurgence into foraging and herbs and things like that. So when people come across my booth at a market, they're like, oh my gosh, fur. I remember my grandmother, she had this gorgeous coat and I wish I could wear fur. And I'm like, well, why can't you? Start with a pair of fur trimmed mitts. You're already wearing leather. What's the difference? And you just kind of challenge people's perspectives and their little world view changes, little steps at a time. And I think having a product that is unique and that can be custom made to each person, a lot of people like that too. And so now they get excited, they can wear fur too, and it's functional, it's beautiful, and it's a heritage piece. And it also harkens back to those old days where you do see, like you said, Yellowstone and this trend going back towards hobby farms and self-reliance, that homesteading feel. So people, I think it just goes hand in hand with that lifestyle change that people are making. And if it's a small step with a pair of mitts, then why not, right? Wear the mitts. Alberta, we have winter for 8 months. Wear the mitts.
Yeah, like I said, we're about to, there's calling for snow tomorrow on June 17th up where we're at. So I feel they come in handy throughout the year. To flash back just a second, one of the questions I like to ask every guest, can you recount your biggest mistake that you've ever made on your trap line, and then the biggest mistake you ever made in your fur shed?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm one of the few around here who do skunks. So learning how to skin skunks on my own, that was a challenge. My family was very hesitant to say my mom's a trapper and now our yard stakes, so that's awesome. That was a big one in the fur shed, I guess. And then another one,
I got to poke on that. So was it just cutting into the essence and then like getting your own kind of skunk perfume that you got to wear around the family for a few days, or was it so was it knife handling that was the problem at the beginning, or was it just the anatomy that you struggled with?
It was not knowing exactly anatomically where that little sack lived. So I was like trying to be careful and looking for it. And let me tell you, I found it. Another big one for me in the fur shed was I was skinning a bunch of wolves and coyotes, and then I had some fox to do. And of course, when you're skinning fox and wolves, you're really going to pull on them, right, to get that to move. And I went up to my next fox and he was ready to go. So I get him hung and I start in on the legs, and I get down to the belly area where I'm going to start pulling, and I give her a good tug and that whole leg come off. And I'm like, oh no, I just wrecked this. I'm like, well, I guess this is going to be a pair of mitts, because I know where I'm going to cut around here now once it's tanned. But just forgetting, sometimes you get complacent in the thickness of hide, right? So that was a learning experience. So now I'm always a little double checky. Hey, what am I saying here?
And then
Yeah.
what about your trap line? Do you remember any big mistakes that led to, misses? I know we talked a little bit about the coyotes and, the learnings there, but was there anything else kind of as a newer trapper that you had done that, you wouldn't make that mistake today?
Yeah, always check your safeties on your Belials and on your conibears. I've gotten caught twice now, once, and both times very lucky. Just one spring went. I'm a big fan of using Belials only, but I had a 120 Duke I was setting for Martin, and I was tripping traps and not entirely sure, it was my first winter, how to trip the trap safely. And yeah, she bounced back and I caught this little finger. And thankfully my youngest daughter was with me at the time. She was little and she was like, Mom, I can't set the spring. I'm like, well, you're gonna have to get tough because you're the only one here right now. And then yeah, the other day I got into a 330, and thankfully I was with a good friend, and he's our fellow trapper as well, so he got me out of there in no time. And honestly, that one was complacency. It was, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to readjust this. I got this. Don't worry about it. Well, all of a sudden I'm like, well, I guess I'm not moving very fast until my friend gets here with the setters. Cause yeah, complacency is a big one. Don't do it. Always think ahead, be smart.
Yep. I had that one. Something similar happened now 2 weeks ago. I was setting some, MB 750s, and I was playing with the pan once I'd already had it really well set. And I was like, I'm just going to adjust this pan a little more, and shot it off, caught my thumb. And thankfully I was with somebody, and he just, 2 seconds, he stepped on either wing and my thumb was out, and no worse for the wear. But yeah, complacency or that little bit of greediness will get you. Which I guess is a good parable for life anyways.
Yeah, it is. Don't get your hand caught in the cookie jar.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
Stacey, like with two questions. One, what piece of advice would you give to other adults, folks like you and myself who are coming in our 30s into this experience and world of trapping, or younger folks who are trapping curious? What would be like a piece of advice to those who might want to explore this way of living?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. My mom always said no question is a stupid question. If you think it through and you can't figure it out, find somebody who knows. Somebody, and never stop learning. I know I've mentioned it before, but I have been blessed with so many wonderful people with a lifetime of trapping skills behind them, and every single one of them I've learned something different from. And they've learned from their fathers and their grandfathers, or the men before them. And just don't be afraid to ask a question. It might seem silly at the time, or maybe it's a new perspective they haven't even thought of, or whatever. But as far as I'm concerned, never stop learning. As an adult, I think sometimes we lose that childlike curiosity, and you get maybe embarrassed to ask the question. But don't, just ask the question.
Yeah, that's my moniker. Let me die learning. That's the goal forever. I want to skirt into my grave asking, potentially dumb questions. What do you see as the future of trapping?
I hope it keeps going down the road that it is, especially in my area. It's something that's not frowned on. It's something that's encouraged. It's something that is a tool for, population control management. But I see a lot of people, using it hand in hand with all of their different lifestyles. Here in this area, I don't see it being lost. And it's a beautiful thing because it is our legacy. It is where we come from. It is our heritage. So I think I can see a lot of future generations getting excited over it, because we do have a lot of people in this area especially who are excited about trapping and passing it on. And as much as social media can be a hindrance, it can also be a really great tool. And things like this, I think, is fabulous because, future generations and people who are curious can come in and listen and learn and say maybe, hey, like, if that person can do it, why can't I? And just keep that knowledge going, right?
I think that's great motivation. One thing that you and I both connected on was writing and Western poetry. You actually suggested two poems that you had been recited to as a child, and that you recited to your daughters, which I have completely stolen. And even when I was camping with my daughter, I read them. I think they were a little lost on her, but maybe in time. But it was The Cremation of Sam McGee and The Dangerous Dan McGrew. Can you talk a little bit about when you first heard these poems and what they mean to you?
So that goes back to my childhood when we were feral kids running around the track. And a lot of times my dad, because we were hours from home, we would have sleepovers at Trapper Don's. And so every evening before bedtime, he would feed us all up and we'd have moose in our belly, and we'd unroll our little sleeping bags in front of the potbelly stove, and he would say, okay, it's time to get ready for bed. And we always knew what it meant because that was story time. And Trapper Don was a master storyteller, and his favorite author was Robert Frost, and he was a Canadian poet, and he wrote a lot about the gold rush and living in the Yukon, and just that the mystique and the ethereal beauty of living in the wilderness. And he had a way of telling this poem that just enchanted a child. And so he would stoke up the fire and we'd snuggle in our little sleeping bags, and he would turn the kerosene lamp down low, and he would settle into his chair. And it was an old Ford Pinto chair that was on blocks, and that was our kitchen table chair in his cabin. And so he'd sit in there and he'd just kind of cross his arms and lean his feet forward, and then in this deep resonant voice he would just start reciting The Cremation of Sam McGee. And I don't know why, but with the light flickering in the fireplace and his deep tones of his voice, it was so soothing. And you could just see the northern lights flickering, through the window of his cabin, but also because it mentions it in the poem. So it all just came together in this beautiful package. And as a child, you didn't realize that you were creating core memories that will forever resonate with you. But, you just laying there in your little sleeping bag and listening to this poem, and it just added to the whole being out in the wilderness and just enjoying the creation and that moment, like just being in that moment. And yeah, I just it will forever be with me for sure. And if you can just pass that on to your daughter, like you said, like how fascinating and cool is that to be able to share that. And so yeah, I think that is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think when we had talked about it, what resonated with me with that story, and I'm sure with other people that are listening, these core memories that I think many people don't get to make in the normal hustle and bustle of life. But I mean, how lucky were you as a kid to sit in a cabin in a sleeping bag in front of a fire with the northern lights flickering with this bigger than life man, reciting poetry of all things, but really cool poetry. I'll challenge everybody listening to go and read the poem. I'll link it in the bio of this episode so you can go and check it out. But passing on that heritage goes beyond just trapping animals. In my mind, it's that whole experience of wilderness, whether it's an everyday thing for you and your family, whether it's a weekend thing, whether it's a monthly or once a year thing, just the importance of getting yourself and your children out there to experience a little bit more of a raw way of life, we're not that far removed from, even though we think we might be. So I think it's beautiful. I love that. And I'm excited to continue sharing that with my kids, not just my daughter, but now my son and my youngest daughter. It's just our litter keeps growing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So with that, you've had a lot of time out in the woods. Second to last question. We're going to be wrapping up soon.
Yeah.
But what's the craziest thing you've ever come across in the woods, whether you're just out and about or on your trap line? You know, in a lifetime of being in the wilderness, what's the most wild thing you've ever come across?
I'm not prepared for that question. I have no idea. We do see a lot of bear, I guess, where I'm at. There's a lot of black bear. It's a lot of fun because then you get to see the whole life cycle. I get to see a lot of cubs. They're so cute. I think my favorite thing is spring. You know, you get to see the moose calves, the cubs, the fox kits. Just being able to see that. So nothing really crazy, I guess, or maybe not out of my range of experience, but I do enjoy just being out there and seeing new life and just enjoying being out there.
I think that's a fair answer to that question. I always ask it because some people run into some crazy people, or some people believe in aliens or Sasquatch, but you know, seeing fawns.
Well, I guess there's some of those.
Oh boy.
But yeah, nothing off the charts.
Okay. Well, and then to kind of wrap things up, I always like to end with a hypothetical. So, would you rather live in a world where you can only trap one species of animal, but you're able to have free Tim Hortons for the rest of your life? Or would you rather live in a world where you can trap any species, but only drink burnt gas station coffee for the rest of your life?
Well, I hate to say it to all the Tim Hortons fans, but I think those two coffees are about on the same level. So at that rate, I'm going to go with all species.
Fair enough.
Because it's exciting, but with my summer job doing damage control trapping, I mean, I guess in a way I've got both of those worlds. My summer life is only beavers because I do all the damage control trapping for the county, but in the winter I'm able to target all the other species. So it is kind of fun. I get all four. And I bake my own coffee, so.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, you know, as an American, I just imagine everybody drinks Tim Hortons, but it's good to know that it's like not the cream of the crop necessarily.
No, that's just slick advertising.
Yeah, well, marketing wins all the time, but
sure does.
Stacey, first and foremost, thank you. I've genuinely been looking forward to this conversation. I have learned a lot. I know listeners have learned a lot, and you know, you have great respect for all the different things that you're doing in the trapping world. You have respect of others. I appreciate it. Where can people learn more about Wolf and Fox? Maybe mention some of the upcoming shows and where people can, you know, maybe follow you and some of the adventures you get into on your trap line.
Sure. So for Wolf and Fox, I do have a website. It's wolfandfoxdesigns.ca. I also have a page on Facebook and Instagram that I try to keep just the product centric. If you can find me on Facebook, it's Stacey Skyrpan. And then some of the upcoming shows, the big ones that I'm super excited are in October, I'll be at the CFR. So that'll be the Canadian Finals Rodeo. That'll be in Edmonton. It's going to be their 50th this year, over 400 vendors. There's a trade show, there's a sale, there's the rodeo. It's going to be fantastic. So if you guys are close by, come and check it out. And then in November, I'll be at Agribition. It'll be in Regina, Saskatchewan. And that's another big rodeo, another trade show. There's a cattle show. Yeah, again, a huge trade show. It's really going to be a lot of fun. Don't forget your cowboy hats.
Yeah, you got to get your beaver felt cowboy hats ready for that one. But
yeah.
Stacey, thank you again. And for everybody listening, we'll catch you on the next episode of the Okayest Trapper.
Thanks for having me. Happy Father's